This video explains the diagram for a natural monopoly. So we start by assuming that in this industry there's not even one producer who could exploit all of the economies of scale available. What that means is that the firm never reaches a point of diseconomies of scale, and therefore their average cost curve is always downward sloping. It never begins to slope upwards because it never reaches diseconomies of scale. We assume that the firm is the industry and the industry is the firm. In other words, there's only one firm in this industry. And we also say that these natural monopolies tend to exist in industries where either the fixed costs or the barriers to entry are particularly high. In these industries, it doesn't make sense to have two businesses providing the same goods. For example, railways, there's no point, it would be a waste of money, to have two different businesses with railway tracks next to each other, going to the same stations. It'd be a waste of money. In the same way, it wouldn't make sense to have two different businesses with water pipes going to the same house. It would be a waste of money, and therefore we allow just one firm to operate in the market. Usually these markets tend to be heavily regulated because they're a monopoly and because often they're providing goods that consumers need, things like electricity or water or telecommunications. We've said that not even one producer can reach a point of diseconomies of scale. That means that the average cost curve is always downward sloping. We draw it like this. An important distinction is that this is the LRAC curve, long run average cost, because we talk about economies of scale being a long run factor. So our LRAC curve is downward sloping, comes to flat but never reaches a point where it's upward sloping. We know that in general the marginal cost curve starts downward sloping and then turns upwards like a tick shape, and it cuts the AC curve at the lowest point. However, this AC curve doesn't have a lowest point because it's always downward sloping. That means we draw our MC curve like this, starts downward sloping, turns to begin pointing upwards, but never reaches our LRAC curve because the LRAC curve is always sloping downwards. Our demand is downward sloping. This is a firm which is the industry and therefore has a downward sloping demand curve, which is the average revenue curve, and we know that marginal revenue is downward sloping twice as steep as the AR curve. If the firm is a profit maximizer, it produces where MC equals MR, which is this quantity Q. We find the price by continuing the line up to the demand curve, giving us price P, and the cost from where this dotted line intersects with the LRAC curve, which is C, and therefore the firm can make a supernormal profit of this area here. However, often these businesses are nationalised and run by the government, and if that's the case, then they might be run at the point which is allocatively efficient, rather than the point which is profit maximising. The point which is allocatively efficient is where MC equals MR, which is this quantity here, Q1. Quantity Q1, the price is P1, so the price is lower for consumers because the good has been nationalised and therefore provided more cheaply. The cost we find by continuing the dotted line from Q1 up to the LRAC curve and tracing across to get C1, and therefore this business is making a loss of this area here, which in reality is only possible if it's subsidised or owned by the government.